Hello everyone, hopefully you can hear and see us all. Welcome to today's webinar, Listen Up, Let's Make Noise About Noise Management, brought to you by BOHS and the UK Hearing Conservation Association. After our presentation today, we're going to be doing a quick Q&A session. So if you have any questions, just submit them and we will get through as many as we can at the end. Any questions that we don't get to, we're going to put to our panelists and they will be distributed via email most likely tomorrow, along with a recording of the webinar and a few supplementary reading materials. So that's my brief introduction done. I will now pass you over to Claire Forshaw to begin, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
That's great. Thanks, Lee. And thanks to BOHS for hosting this and doing all the kind of organising and admin for us. Really appreciate giving us this platform to speak to you. And thanks in anticipation to our speakers for joining us today. You've got a great source of expertise here, so please do use them and ask the questions while you have the opportunity. My name's Claire Forshaw. If any of you don't know me, I've worked for many years in HSE, looking after noise as a bit of a pet topic, and I work for Park Health and Safety on the consultancy side, and a couple of years ago I set up this charitable organisation association, really with the aim of bringing together like-minded people who are fairly frustrated in progress and change around the topic of noise and conserving people's hearing. So we're a fairly new charitable organisation. We are multidisciplinary in our members. So we have a wide range of people like occupational hygienists, occupational health professionals, acousticians, lots of different people, all with a passion around conserving people's hearing and advancing noise control issues. So we're focused on preventable causes of hearing health harm. So I'm hoping now my presentation will progress. So this really is what we're all about, and our key kind of special interest groups are outlined there. So we look at hearing conservation in the workplace, at leisure, in educating young people in music and entertainment, and another aspect that we're developing through a working group is in design or by design, hearing conservation by design. So just a very quick introduction to me and to look at why this is a problem and why this is something that we're interested and ambitious about. And I hope today not only gives you a lot of information that you can go away and use and apply in the workplaces that you influence, but I also hope it really gives you a kind of impetus to do something and an ambition to change things, because I think that's really what is often lacking when it comes to dealing with noise, particularly in workplaces. And I think that comes down to, I believe a lot of this is our kind of unhealthy relationship and attitude, a lot of it around attitudes towards noise. We tend to, psychologically, we tend to associate noisy environments with fun and excitement. And we think of a lack of noise in terms of being isolated and lonely and unhappy. And I think we need to kind of change that attitude in life, because we tend to probably bring that into our workplaces in terms of, well, it's just one of those things. It's not really that important. So we don't challenge and we don't even potentially notice that we have an issue. We don't recognise. And obviously, as occupational hygienists, which I presume most of you are joining us on this webinar, do we overtly recognise, acknowledge and evaluate the risks of noise when we come across it? So in terms of our attitudes, it is much more than just deafness. We commonly instinctively associate noise exposure with hearing loss, and I guess we also recognise the issue of tinnitus, but maybe less so than the hearing loss. But I think we also need to give more credit and more interest in the fact that noise is a stressor. It's a distraction issue. It affects people's concentration. And I hope we all recognise that it is also a safety issue. I think audibility and being able to hear and communicate in work environments is becoming more recognisable now. And I'm sure Chris could talk about a lot of fatalities where the ability to hear has been affected. So noise has certainly been implicated in fatalities in workplaces. And when you have a hearing loss, that kind of disability again goes beyond just an impact on your ability to hear. So it's more than just that sense of hearing. It's, you know, mental health, relationships, eventually being able to financially be rewarded in your role, in your jobs, and just a general negative impact on your quality of life. And more recently, the link has been established between hearing loss and dementia. There's some kind of statistics there. So again, you're even more reason for us to take this topic seriously. And we don't quite understand exactly how that relationship works, but there's been various theories being explored, and one is about the fact that if there's a lack of auditory stimulus to a particular part of the brain, that's actually associated with memory. So having that lack of stimulus from noise, from hearing, actually affects the center in the brain where memory is stored and processed. So really interesting and significant finding, which again should help us to focus attention, hopefully, on the subject. And I mentioned that we don't just look at workplaces in terms of preventable causes and preventable exposures to harmful noise. If we think about, just this slide to give you an example of personal exposure through headphone use, and people now are fairly constantly plugged into headphones. I've got these on today, although I can't hear anything feeding back from it. But you know, if you look at the kind of exposure limits there for the sound pressure levels, you know, when we think that most people are probably listening at levels of 90 dB and above, you know, you can see that those daily exposure limits are being reached fairly soon. But there are apps, and I know the iPhone you can download something which can track your listening levels and give you advice. So again, something that maybe we don't often do in terms of trying to influence people's activities outside the workplace, but when we think of the added exposure that that's bringing, it's obviously going to be really significant. This is something to think about. So thanks again to BOHS. That was a quick introduction to who we are. Just to let you know that we do have a few more webinars coming up in the next coming weeks, and they are outlined there. You might be interested to join us for some of those. And if you are interested, our website's got loads of information and resources on there, picking up on some of what both Peter and Chris are going to talk about today. So do check us out, follow us on Twitter, and sign up to our newsletter to make sure you don't miss any of our really interesting blogs and resources that we're developing over the coming months. And contact us at inquiries if you have any comments or views or things that you'd like to share or get involved with. So enjoy the rest of the webinar. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll speak to you all soon.
Thank you for that, Claire. I'm going to pass over to Chris Steele now, so he will be able to share his screen and continue the webinar.
Hello, I'm hoping you can hear me. Oh dear, what's happened? Can you see my slides? Yeah. Is that a yes? Okay, I can't see mine. Hang on, I don't know what I've done here. Oh, there we go. Right, so sorry, I'm Chris Steele. I'm a noise and vibration inspector for the HSE. So what I was wanting to talk to you today about is the types of things that we're finding in workplaces, specifically in relation to workplace noise. I'm going to use a term called the 3 C's. These are the 3 things that HSE tends to want to focus on when we're dealing with noise at work. Hopefully you can see all that. For me, those are noise control, competent consultancy, and credible noise data. Before I kind of jump into all that, I think for a lot of people, the assumption is that sort of modern workplace is quite a sort of swanky and technologically advanced places where you might even have a robot helping you out. Sadly, for a lot of people who are at work, whether that's in a factory, on a construction site, or outside, the reality is quite different. And you know, when we go around the sites, we see things which, kind of give you a general flavour of how good the control is going to be for things like hearing protection. If you come to sites where we still see people with health and safety posters up that were made in the 1940s as what they think is suitable information for their employees, or that picture down in the bottom corner there, which was a factory that we went to where the manager had ripped up the floor on the first floor of the factory because he wanted to use it for his kitchen. It gives you a sense that maybe people aren't taking as much care as they should. For me specifically, when I'm dealing with noise issues, when I'm looking right at the very bottom of the control hierarchy, I'm still seeing poor performance for things like hearing protection. Those earmuffs that you can see there were confiscated from a worker because they clearly weren't capable of doing what they needed to do. And the last photograph where you can see the side of the chap's head there, that was taken in 2019, and that is somebody who's still stuffing tissue paper into his ears in order to provide himself with some sort of protection from noise because his employer wasn't providing him with hearing protection. As we start to move up the control hierarchy, we still see issues. So even when people have made an effort, we get problems. So the photograph that you can see on your left, this is a machine where there's been some noise enclosure built round about it, and during some routine maintenance, the panel of it wasn't replaced properly, so there was noise leaking out the side. So there seems to be a general lack of understanding that even when controls put in place as to how it works and what it's supposed to be doing. The photograph that's on the right-hand side, that's from a steel manufacturing site that I went to, and this is actually the back end of a guillotine. So you're probably wondering, why am I showing you this? Well, what the company had done was, that used to be a steel box that collects all the scrap metal, and they've replaced it with a wooden box because they thought, well, it'll be quieter, which it was. And admittedly, it's not a particularly exciting and interesting way of controlling noise. It's maybe not the most effective way to do it, but it does make a difference. The reason why I'm showing you this is, some of you may know I post quite a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. Normally, if I post things on LinkedIn, I'll be lucky if I get about 600 people looking at it. When I posted that on LinkedIn, that wooden box, I got about 8,000 people looking at it. And I just think that if 8,000 people are interested in looking at a wooden box, there's clearly a demand and a desire to find out how you control noise. The second aspect, the thing about competent consultancies, I'm sure some of you are aware of this case where a consultant was taken to court for not providing good advice on noise, hand-arm vibration and COSH. And the fine that he was issued with, the £1,400, is relatively small, but I can safely say, as somebody who used to be a consultant, that being found incompetent in a court of law and having press headlines and industry paper headlines saying that I've been publicly humiliated, it would be pretty kind of detrimental to being able to carry on doing my job. If, when I was a consultant, if that sort of thing had happened to me. And the obvious question that comes out of this type of thing as well, is this a one-off? Do we see a lot of consultancy competency issues? And sadly, the answer to that is yes. It's just we don't always take them to court. An example that I came across very recently, what you're looking at there is a thing called a tapping machine. It's used primarily, well, it's used solely for doing sound insulation tests in flats, and came across a consultant who'd done a 1-week course in sound insulation testing, and because he had bought the equipment and had a sound level meter, then thought he could go out and start doing workplace noise assessments. The reason why he got caught was the inspector, who happened to go to one of his clients, thought it was unusual that he'd written a noise report which indicated that the one piece of machinery that he had, which was outside, got louder the further away you went from it. When we took him to task on it, he started off saying there was no issues, and then kind of came round to the realisation that he'd never done workplace noise before, didn't really know what he was up to. The other thing that I mentioned there was the idea of credible noise data, and this year again, this is me posting stuff on LinkedIn, and this is actually taken from a document called Sound Solutions for Food Industry. The information that's in this was republished in 2013, but the noise data you're looking at is probably from the late 90s and early 2000s, so not the newest thing. Instead of getting my usual 600 people looking at it, I got 5,000 people looking at it, and actually got emails from people as far away as Canada and India asking me, oh, do you have any more of this type of stuff, because we really have an issue getting, credible noise data. And that's a perennial issue for the HSE. Back in 2012, we did some reporting on people can find quiet machinery, and most people agreed that they couldn't. And that's not because quiet machinery doesn't exist. It's because it's difficult to find the information that would indicate to you that it is quieter when it's in use. And then similarly, when I did a straw poll myself, I found that in 2020 that about 80% of people were also finding it difficult to find reliable noise data when they were asking for it. So those three things, those three C's, control of noise, competent consultancy, and credible noise data, are the three things that the HSE tends to want to concentrate on, because those are where we find the biggest issues. I suppose the obvious question that comes out of that is, well, what is the HSE doing about this? What's the HSE doing on noise, and why can't we do more? And I'm probably going to go a bit off message here, but I would ask a question, you know, how much money do you think British industry spends on third-party health and safety advice in a typical year? So this is for all health and safety advice, not just noise. Well, obviously you can't answer me because you're all at home or on your computers, so I'll tell you what it is. It's about £1.2 billion a year spent on third-party consultancy. So roughly that's 10 times the central government budget that the HSE gets. So the reality is that for the vast majority of people that are looking for advice, whether it's on noise or any other matter, they're not really coming to the HSE for it. They're coming to consultants for that information. They're coming to professionals for that information, and it's important that that's correct. You know, British industry relies on professional bodies like BOHS to see that good advice is in the marketplace. So, clear advice on control. What are we doing about that? What are the things that are available to us? What's HSE doing? What's industry doing? So, well, if you go on our website, it's been there for a long time. We've got our case studies, and you know, depending on what industry you're involved in, there's information there for a vast range of industries. The two things that surprise me about this are, number one, the amount of duty holders and consultants that I get involved with who have not looked at the case study on the HSE website. So they may be working in the chemical or engineering industry, and they're not aware of the fact that there's information on the HSE website that can provide them with, you know, advice on how to control noise. That's surprising. The second thing that's surprising about it is that if it's on our website, then by definition, what HSE is saying is we think these control measures are reasonably practicable. So if our inspectors go to site and find a duty holder who hasn't implemented these control measures, we would ask questions as to why, and if they can't give us a good enough answer, then there's a possibility that they're going to get enforcement taken against them. What about getting advice out to industry? Because admittedly, it's not easy finding stuff on the HSE website. Well, over the last few years, we've tried to move down towards giving information to and having discussions with trade associations. So for instance, the BCSA, the British Constructional Steel Association, and the British Association of Reinforcement have recently published their own industry-specific guidance on noise and hand-arm vibration, which means that they have information which is specific to their activities that they can tell their members, so they don't have to go scrabbling around on the HSE website. And to a greater or lesser extent, these other organisations, including the HCA, are organisations that we're working with and have worked with to try and develop that kind of information. In terms of competent consultancy, well, what can we do about that? What's industry done about that? Well, not too long ago, a group of consultants who represent BOHS members, IOSH members, IOA members, and ANC members got together and said, let's see if we can put together a really simple 2-page guidance document that any duty holder can use, and it can just be a list of questions that they can ask a consultant to say, can you answer yes to these questions? If you can, then hopefully you're competent. Now, I don't expect you to be able to read this because it's probably a bit small, but in essence, it is just a list of questions that say, you know, are you competent, etc. But it also has questions in there for the duty holder to ask themselves so that they can make sure that they're given the right information to the consultant, because that tends to be an issue that comes up a lot, is that what the client asks for is not necessarily what they actually need. In terms of what HSE can do about consultants and what we intend to do, and this is something that we're looking at doing come the next year, is that we're going to be collecting reports, noise consultancy reports, from a random selection of site visits. So inspectors will go around and just ask for them. They'll be sent back to the noise and vibration team, and we'll review them. And where we find poor practice, we will be taking enforcement. So the last C in my list, the credible noise data thing, what are we doing about that? Well, what's HSE been up to on that? Well, as you know, we've got Buy Quiet, which again is little more than a list of questions to ask your suppliers, your machinery and tool suppliers when it comes to noise. But we have been working with tool suppliers and organisations like the Hire Association Europe for a number of years to make sure that their members are given that information out. In addition to that, even though we are about to leave the EU, it hasn't stopped us from trying to get a cross-border guidance document produced, which makes it really simple and obvious for tool manufacturers and tool suppliers to know exactly what it is that we're looking for. And you know, that information will be there, and it is very simple and obvious information to use. In terms of what we can actually do to people who are supplying, again, this is something that we're looking at in terms of our inspection and enforcement activities. So the noise and vibration inspectors are going to be looking at companies who fail to provide credible noise data. So we're not looking at duty holders and are you doing noise measurements. What we're saying is, if you manufacture machinery, if you manufacture tools, are you providing noise data? And is it credible? Is it in use? Now, I've been given 3 or 4 specific machinery types to look at, and I'll be looking at them over the next sort of year or so. So probably a question that you get asked, or you're probably asking yourself, I'm imagining, is, you know, are there still a lot of noisy workplaces out there? Is noise still that big of an issue? Surely, you know, it's been almost 20 years since the regulations changed. Is it not something that's now been dealt with? I always find that a good way to get a little barometer on that is to maybe sit down and watch a few episodes of In the Factory with Greg Wallace, because you'll find that in pretty much every single episode of that programme, Greg or Cheryl will be wearing some sort of hearing protection, whether he's at a liqueur factory making biscuits or working in a brewery. There's noise, and that's a pretty kind of obvious indication that there's still a lot of people in the UK who go to work every day and are exposed to noise at a level that's likely to be damaging to their health. Otherwise, why would they be wearing hearing protection? Now, I don't want to end this talk with a load of photographs of Greg Wallace, because it might make you think that I'm stalking him in some bizarre way. So I'll just leave you with a quick recap, and just to remind you that if you're interested in doing noise management and noise control, those 3 C's, controller noise, competent consultants, and credible noise data, are the key areas that we see you can get the best improvements in terms of reducing noise overall. And I wish you the best of luck with that. Okay, thank you very much.
Excellent, thank you, Chris. So I'm going to pass the baton over to Peter Wilson, who should be able to share his screen now, and then we can carry on.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Peter Wilson. I'm the Technical Director at the IMEC. I have been doing this for a very, very long time, and consequently, I am seriously depressed. So little has changed in the last 30 odd years, and yet the technology exists to massively reduce hearing damage risk. So what I'm going to be talking about is noise control, which is often the sort of orphan as far as risk management is concerned. We run the IOSH competency courses, and as Chris said, the standard reporting leaves a lot to be desired, and noise control is virtually never mentioned. So I'm going to be going through some of the basics of noise control and giving you some very simple, practical engineering, low-cost noise control solutions to very, very common noise problems. There'll also be a document forwarded to you by email as well, where you can see more details, materials, and the rest of it.
Peter, sorry, we can't see your slides. Sorry, I don't know if you've not pulled them up yet. No, it's fine.
Said share screen. So
yeah, we've got the desktop. I don't know if it's on another monitor or something.
Okay, hang on a second. Let me pull that across. Does that work? Can you see it now?
No, not yet. Sorry.
Yeah, this
it's on the desktop screen when you've got your.
Okay. Let me just move it to another screen. We'll see if this works.
Oh, we've got movement. There we go. Yeah, there's the slide. So if you just full screen that.
But that's not. Yes, hang on. It's just full screen on another screen. So it's one of the problems with having multiple screens here. That work?
Perfect. Thank you very much. Cool. I'll mute myself again and carry on.
Let's start again then. I can speak. I assume you can hear me. So anyway, right. Yes, the HSA is, as Claire talked about, the project to pull together best practice. But one of the things I'd like to talk about is something that a lot of people don't really realize, is that noise risk is directly proportional to noise dose. Now, everyone says that, but what it actually means in practice is that if you reduce the noise level by 3 dB, you've halved the energy, which means you've halved the risk. And if noise levels are above 95 dBA, it becomes approximately, rule of thumb, becomes very difficult to guarantee adequate protection using PPE. And above 100 dBA, you're almost doomed. It's very, very difficult to guarantee protection. So if you look at the effect that reducing noise levels has on risk, a 3 dB reduction reduces your risk by 50%, 6 dB it's 75%, and if you knock 10 dB off, you reduce the risk by 90%. One of the magic things is if you can get the noise levels below 85, then you can say mandatory hearing protection is not required. But the thing that a lot of people don't really understand is if you've got 97 dBA, for example, and you can reduce the noise to 94, you have halved the risk. And you've also moved the noise into a zone where PPE is much easier to manage. Now, people don't apply this information, and as a result, things don't get done. One of the big problems is lack of knowledge about noise control, both from general consultants, such as occupational hygienists and so on, and also by end users. So a few things here you might not know. Fans, for example, if you increase fan efficiency or use aerodynamics, you can solve a lot of noise control problems on fans without using silencers. There's also some very weird new materials which allow air through but not noise. There's also proprietary air nozzles, pneumatic air nozzles available that use 20% less compressed air for the same thrust and reduce the noise levels by 90%. So it's actually profitable to use them, and yet I walk into factories, as Chris will, time and time again, everyone is using simple nozzles that don't work properly and are very, very noisy, unnecessarily expenditure of money on compressed air. Acoustic absorbent materials are generally foams, rock wool, fiberglass, and people look at those and go, well, they're not very hygienic, they're not weatherproof, oil will soak into them. But nowadays, there are materials that are pretty well immune to everything that also absorb noise very, very well. And there's also sound damp steel, which is a steel laminate available, just like ordinary steel. You can use it like ordinary steel, but it looks like steel, sounds like rubber. As an engineer, I love it. It's cheap, it's robust, and it's a question of knowing what's possible. Now, I do have a video here. Let me play this. If we look at this, this is an example of using that. Let's hope you can hear it. Okay, I'll forget about that then. The sound is not working, coming through, and my computer's gone mad, so you have to take my word for it. This is extremely quiet when you're dropping things onto it. The other thing is, another example of perhaps something you wouldn't know is that who would think sellotape was noisy? Well, I've been in areas where they're packaging and building cardboard cartons, where you're measuring over 100 dBA from sellotape. And there is the weird idea, which I think is pretty cool, but maybe I should get out more, of quiet tape. And you can buy that off the shelf. So rather than putting an enclosure around the machine, you just buy quiet tape. Now, if you knew about all these things, what would be possible? As an engineer, I find it really depressing that companies spend 3 to 10 times what they need to spend on noise control and don't get the results that they could get by using better engineering technology. Now, these are the top 10 noise control solutions that we've sort of put together that cover a large number of very typical noise problems across many industries. So I'll be going through these very quickly. The first one is vibration control, which is vibration damping and vibration isolation pads, both very quick and easy to do. Fans, the way you install them, and new technology for reducing the noise from fans. Pneumatics. I can boldly say, with all these years' experience, there's absolutely no reason why you should have unsilenced pneumatic exhausts on any site, and I'll tell you how you can do that. Pneumatic nozzles, you can save a lot of money by switching to efficient units. And also chains, timing belts, electric motors, hydraulic power packs, other classic noise sources. A lot of machines have safety guards, but a lot of them don't work as acoustic guards, and it's quite easy to convert one into the other. First off, damping. I've talked about this material very briefly. Laminated steel, available off the shelf, and here's some components made of it. Knocks the noise from those components by between 10 and 20 dB. Very, very cheap, very, very effective. It's only been around for 40 or 45 years, so it's really quite amazing. I give talks to engineers, and 90% of them or more have never heard of it, and yet it's such a simple swap to do on a site. You can even create a laminate in situ on an existing chute or hopper. The typical application for that is in weighing machines. A lot of industries use weighing machines for sweets, for vegetables, for nuts and bolts, whatever. Typically, noise levels are sort of 87 to 98 or even higher. They're often sold with enclosures, which quite often actually increase the noise level underneath the platform because they're funneling the noise downwards. And they cause hygiene problems in the food industry. Now, we've developed a solution for this, which largely involves using laminated steel and a few other little tricks, engineering tricks, which are about a quarter of the cost or less than an enclosure, much more effective, and don't cause hygiene problems. This particular application, 94 dBA with the enclosure in place. With the enclosure removed and all the surfaces damped, it was down to 82 dBA. And also it just meant the cleaning time was reduced from a whole day down to about an hour. Now, the manufacturers know what we do, but they make more money out of selling enclosures. The next one is vibration isolation, which is basically interposing, in most simple cases, a simple anti-vibration pad between the machine and the surface that's radiating the noise. In this particular case, it's a pump mounted on a nice steel plate which acts like a loudspeaker. The diagram on the left is the way you often see these things fitted with a bolt straight through, which means you haven't vibration isolated, you just jack it up by a centimeter. You need to put a flexible washer under the head of the bolt with a load spreading washer, and that is very, very cheap and very, very effective and very, very simple, where vibration transmission causes a noise problem. Moving on to fans, one of the key things you can do is just make fans more efficient and smooth the flow into and out of the fan. The picture on the left just shows fitting a bell mouth to an axial flow fan. That can knock 6 dBA off the fan noise, which is 75% reduction in noise risk. Also, don't put things like dampers or bends close to the fan. You mess up the fan efficiency and you increase noise levels. If you can increase fan efficiency and therefore reduce the speed of the fan, apart from the cost savings in terms of power, you get a big reduction in noise because noise is proportional to fifth power of fan speed. So a 20% reduction in noise reduces 20% reduction in fan speed reduces the noise by 5 dB, which is a factor of 3. So 20% off fan speed, you get 67% off the noise risk. If miraculously you can reduce the fan speed by 50%, you reduce the noise by a factor of 30, and therefore the risk by a factor of 30. So efficiency is a key point in looking at any fan system noise. There are also aerodynamic fan noise control technologies. In this particular case, you've probably lain awake at night wondering what system do they use to suck aluminium cans that are bent or broken off the line so they get recycled. Well, they use what are called chopper fans, which suck the damaged cans off the line, and then the cans are then shredded by passing through the fan. As you can imagine, it's a pretty noisy process, and this caused both environmental and occupational noise problems, massive noise problems. They were quoted £35,000 for silencers, which had to have the cans go through them, lagging enclosures and so on. Instead, they went for aerodynamic noise control, which reduced the noise for a cost of about £3,000 per fan, reduced the noise by 22 dBA, a fraction of the cost and without all the hassles. So it's knowing what is possible can mean that things get done to reduce the risk rather than just being left or postponed because it's going to be expensive. Just as an aside to show you what can be done, a colleague of mine fixed the noise from this boiler burner by using a yogurt pot. It's the only known case of yogurt-based noise control. Like Blue Peter, he said, I think it's the burner problem. Got a yogurt pot from the canteen, did a Blue Peter exercise cutting it up, and now they just have aluminium yogurt pots inside the burner. So that reduced the noise, the tonal noise problem by 16 decibels. So it's knowing what is possible. Pneumatics, very common noise source. Now, there are probably about 70 or 80 different types of silencer around, and the big problem with them is a lot of them don't work very well, and they can cause back pressure, which means it can affect the operation of the machine. However, you can buy straight-through silencers, and the bottom picture shows you manifolding multiple exhausts into one straight-through silencer. So you can stick a 1 or 2 inch pipe along the side of a set of machines, plumb all the exhaust ports into that, and stick a straight-through zero back pressure silencer on the end. Also, I recommend standardizing on 3 sizes of silencer across the whole site. So you have small, medium, and large. That way, you can just replace a silencer with one of those. You just fit adapters to make sure they all fit. That just makes life easy for the maintenance engineer, because if a silencer goes missing, the machine still works. It's just that it's very noisy. Efficient off-the-shelf in training nozzles are about 10 dB quiet at the same thrust and use 20% less air. And they pay for themselves very, very quickly. They're also intrinsically safe. They pay for themselves very, very quickly because they use less compressed air. So there's no excuse really in almost all circumstances for not using these sorts of nozzles. Chains and timing belts can also be very noisy. Replacing noisy chains with belts, and quite often noisy chains, it's because the chains stretch and they rub against guards and so on. If you switch them for belts, that can make it a lot quieter, but also you can buy quiet belts with a chevron tooth pattern, or if you've got a wide tooth belt, replace it with 2 narrow tooth belts with the same load capabilities. That will dramatically reduce the noise. Also, make sure the belt tension is correct, and between 5 and 20 dB noise reductions are possible by doing these simple things. Motors, very, very common. We've measured motors up to about 100 plus dBA because of the high-speed fan on the back. You can buy off-the-shelf quiet motors that are 10 or 15 dB quieter and more efficient. So feed them into your system. So you're replacing noisy motors with quiet motors. You will actually, again, this is a profitable exercise because they use less power in the long term. Hydraulic power packs are an absolute classic. Basically, a motor pump unit isn't that noisy, they're stiff. So what people do is the manufacturer will often bolt these to a large oil tank. And the result of that is that high levels of noise are radiated by the tank, which acts like a loudspeaker. And I'm just wondering whether everyone can hear me because it's all gone dead.
Yep, noise is still fine for us.
You can still hear me. Okay. It just went very, very quiet, and I got a buzz.
I think the webcam's gone, but the webcam's gone. But that's fine. The sound is there, the presentation's there. That's all good.
Okay, cool. So what the manufacturer then does is bolt the motor pump unit to a large tank, which acts like a fantastic loudspeaker, amplifying the noise as much as possible. Now, some manufacturers put enclosures over the top of the tanks, and all you're doing is bolting on a large loudspeaker. In one case, this doubled the noise level. However, using vibration isolation and flexible pipes, which is, again, the anti-vibration pads, you can reduce the noise by between 10 and 20 dBA very quickly, very easily, and without obstructing the view if there's a leak. So you're not hiding the machine, so you can see if there's a leak. Also, you're not going to have the thermal gain problems that you get if you put an enclosure or a screen very close to these things. Finally, existing guards. Fundamentally, if you have a guard with a few gaps, halving that open area of gap will reduce the noise by 3 dB, which is a 50% reduction in risk. So you can walk up to a machine and go, okay, it's got a 2 centimeter gap around the guard. If I reduce that to 1 centimeter, I halve the risk. If I reduce it to 1 millimeter, I reduce the risk by 90%, which is a 10 dB reduction. The other trick is to fit acoustic absorbent inside the guard. If there are no absorbent inside, then this will reduce the noise inside the guard by around 5 dB or more. And that can even be very hygienic acoustic absorption as well. And if the guard is radiating noise because of vibration, you can damp it in situ or just replace the guard with a laminated steel version. And here's me doing a very, very sophisticated mock-up using cardboard. Having been trained on Blue Peter from a very early age, that's the sort of thing that quite appeals. So you can work out the trade-off between noise reduction and reducing the gaps round guards in a graph like this. As Chris mentioned, purchasing policy is very important. So some of these things should be applied to new plant before you get it. Unfortunately, many manufacturers do not understand engineering noise control. So they will tend to not necessarily use best practice to try and make quiet plant. So summarizing overall, there are two key things to reduce risk quickly and easily. One is PPE performance can be dramatically improved through very simple measures. So that's the first step, which you can do immediately. Second step is to look at the low-hanging fruit associated with engineering noise control and just knowing what's possible in terms of noise control. 50 to 80% or more reductions in risk at very, very low cost, and sometimes they will pay for themselves. And if you combine those two into one, you can really reduce your risk by 70, 80, 90% at very little cost. And this could save the economy about 4 billion per annum, estimated in reduction of the cost of noise-induced hearing loss. Now, we have this massive database of noise control fixes, a bit like the HSE database, and a load of more sources on there. None of them involve enclosures. So these are all low-cost engineering noise control techniques. And basically, we've decided to make it open source. So if you need information on a lot of noise control, simple engineering noise control, just to find out what's possible and what sort of cost it is, do things like going on the HSE website. On our website, you can search through our database of noise control fixes. And if you can't do that, or it's not on there, you can go through a process and send us the data by email. So send us some noise levels and noise data or pictures of noisy plant and a smartphone video clip. We will run that through our database, no cost. Have a look at the soundtrack, analyze that, and give you a list of the noise control options and typical likely costs. Also, if you're looking around a site and looking at a piece of plant that's noisy and wonder what can be done about it, if you've got a mobile phone with WhatsApp on it, you can arrange a brief review with one of our engineers free on WhatsApp. So you can say, this machine, what do you reckon? And you go, you're doomed. There's nothing you do about it. Or we might say, there's a simple solution. So email us videos, we'll run it through our database and provide you with a list of the noise control options just so you would know what was possible. Or you can do it on our website. And that's accessible from anywhere on the planet. Any questions?
Yep, so we'll open it up for questions now. We'll give it a couple of minutes just to see if anything does come through. And if you think of anything this afternoon that you didn't think to ask now, you can always email one of the emails you've seen in today's presentations, or you can email myself at marketing@bohs.org, and well, I'll make sure they get to the panelists, and I will distribute everything tomorrow with a recording of this video. I do have a quick question here. Do you have a link for the client competent consultant questions, please? Is that something that we can put into the email tomorrow?
Yes, yeah, it's on. Well, it's on the Hearing Conservation Association's website. I can send you. I can put a link in the question thing if you want. I think I've sent that to the guy.
Yeah, that's perfect then. Well, if you think it would be handy, I can put it into the email as well as anything else that you think would be handy for extra reading material. So yeah, so just give it another minute or so, and we'll oh no, nothing through yet. Yep, so we've got a question. Here they are, they're coming through now. coming through thick and fast. So I note a huge demand for asbestos consultancy. How large is the market for noise testing and consultancy? And thank you for sharing the link previously. So I'll throw that question out to the group.
Well, I'll try and answer that. I don't know exactly what the size of the market is. Certainly, it's nowhere near the same size as the asbestos market. I'd have to admit that from my experience doing consultancy work in the past, that the size of the market is actually pretty poor. It's pretty small at this stage, and that's because there's a lot of people who are relying on what I would class as people who aren't competent to give them advice on noise control. So they tend not to be coming to people who are BOHS members or IOA members or IOSH members. They're going out to individuals who are operating below the market. The problem I have with that is that, well, people don't remember why a noise consultant was bad. They just remember that they got a consultant and the consultants were bad. And so if you're going to the BOHS conference that's coming up, the 2021, I'm going to be talking at that in an effort to try and get competency on the agenda for a cross organisational group to be run that includes BOHS, IOSH and IOA, to try and improve the market so that there actually is a better marketplace for consultants to actually come into.
Cool, thank you very much. There's another question here. Can you say something about overprotection by HPDs, loss of situational awareness?
I'll take that one as well. I've had, it's Claire touched on this, I've worked on 3 fatalities now as a result of, and that's just in the last couple of years, as a result of people being wearing hearing protection and not being able to hear what was going on. And you know, it's dangerous. We see a lot of it, and a lot of the times it's because people are just buying hearing protection off the shelf and not actually going through the process of figuring out whether or not it's the right hearing protection for them. HSE's expectation is that you should try to avoid reducing the noise at the ear under the hearing protection to levels which are below 70 dB. And also there's a question as to whether or not, you know, are you able to hear warning alarms or warning signals? There's also in the guidance document for noise at work, there's an expectation that you should be assessing that. So if you're issuing hearing protection and then you've got a concern that they might not be able to hear warning signals, then you should have some sort of assessment on that to make sure that that's not going to happen.
And then there's another couple here, so we'll go through them. I work in the pharma industry, sometimes difficult to have engineering controls that can be used with human products, limited available resources. I think that's, yeah, so that's the question there. Do you want me to repeat that? Sorry.
That's okay. Maybe I should take that. We do quite a lot of work in the pharmaceutical industry because engineering noise control is particularly appropriate, because quite often it's quite subtle things that can be done. But on the other hand, you have to prove what sort of materials you're using in the food and pharmaceutical industries, that they are safe and so on. But in some cases, once you've done the diagnosis, the engineering controls do not affect the product quality or hygiene. So it is possible in a lot of cases. Laminated stainless steel is brilliant stuff in the pharmaceutical industry, for example. And there are also acoustic absorbed materials that are safe for use in pharmaceutical materials, pharmaceutical installations.
There's another question here. Is there a way that you know of on how to reduce noise at gas turbine generators? That's something that...
Gas turbine generators are usually packaged because the noise levels are unbelievably high. And in my experience, the key thing about that is there's nothing you can do about the gas turbine generator, but the package itself, they do vary in design as to how effective they are. We're doing a project in Ireland at the moment on a gas turbine generator, and it's just some weaknesses in the package that's been provided by the manufacturer. And these are going to be addressed fairly quickly and fairly cheaply to reduce noise levels. But the package itself, again, they usually come with massive enclosures and silencers and so on to control the noise down to a reasonable level. It's the details that often let them down.
Thank you. And with the HSE N&V team planning to look into a report from consultants, are there any plans to publish good and bad examples of these reports?
I mean, if they're really bad, they'll probably end up in court, I would imagine. So you might see them that way, but no, we wouldn't. I mean, that's, you know, I think there's two, as I said before, there's two areas. There are people who are operating out with of professional organisations and associations that we feel are detrimental to the overall market. And I think, you know, certainly when we come to talk about it, once we've done those inspections, we will be showing you the types of things that we've seen. If we come across people who are members of professional organisations that are doing poor work, then depending on how bad it is, we will probably go to a professional association and say, this is what your members are producing, and maybe you should make your members aware that this isn't acceptable. But no, I can't imagine that we'll be showing, you know, bad examples. Good examples, yeah, we might show good examples. I can think of one that I worked on recently where a consultant up in the northeast of Scotland in a fish plant did a very, very good report. But, you know, we haven't got any plans for it just now.
And
we actually, as far as reports are concerned on our courses, we would sometimes show good and bad reports, heavily redacted, just to show some of the common mistakes that people make.
And are there any quick fixes on noise control for activities created by materials handling, e.g. bottle knocking, metal drum rolling, or kitchen utensil handling while washing them?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's difficult. Some of that is almost like ergonomics. Do things have to be dropped from a great height, or can they be dropped from a lower height? Simple things like that. Drum rolling is a material you can put on the floor to reduce the impacts. You can sometimes get away with quite a lot of cushioning, depends on the circumstances. Bottle impacts, bottle is very difficult on crowding, but bottle guide impacts, yes, that you can design stainless steel sort of sprung guides that can reduce the impacts quite a lot. We can get about 5 to 10 dB off those impacts. Bottle is difficult. We generally try and control the line speed where you get the impacts. And on a line that was for cosmetics, we managed to get about 5 dB off just by tweaking the line speed very slightly. Didn't reduce the productivity, but it did knock about 5 dB off, which is reducing the risk by a factor of 3.
There's one for you specifically, Peter. Do you have any ideas on how to reduce noise with construction plants such as compaction plates, cut-off saws, breakers, etc.? Thanks.
That's very difficult. By the very nature of the kit, it's very, very difficult to design things. Compactor plates, yes, if they're IC engine compactor plates, sometimes the noise is dominated by exhausts and so on, or the plate itself can be damped. But things like breakers, it's pretty well a design feature. There are shrouds you can get for certain breakers. I would just buy as quiet a breaker as you can get. The key thing in those areas is to put as much pressure on suppliers and hire companies as possible. If you look at the effect of not having, for example, hand-on vibration, manufacturers make great leaps forward in reducing vibration because there is no PPE for hand-on vibration. They tend to have been much less proactive for noise because there is PPE. So theoretically, they just say safe use requires PPE. Fundamentally, they haven't done so much on noise because there's not the same commercial pressure to do something about it at source at the design stage.
If I can comment on that as well, I think generally we're talking about construction tools there, and one of my kind of bugbears is the sort of lack of realisation amongst designers that when they specify particular materials that they're creating risks further down the line for people who are working on site. So yes, it's difficult to find quieter breakers, but do they have to be hand operated, and can they be operated from the back of a backhoe or a JCB digger? And that means that the operator can actually be inside a vehicle and get some protection that way. Similarly, things like when you're breaking out tarmac on a road, there are other options for doing that. There's different ways of doing it that can be quieter. and things like cut-off saws and cutting into new material. You know, there are ways of designing buildings that can reduce the need for you to have to, you know, go in afterwards and cut out the holes that you need. So things like top hat sections on concrete floors is a great way to avoid using things like coring tools and that type of stuff. And then even the types of cutting systems that are being used, if they're using we find generally diamond tip cutting systems tend to be quieter than the tungsten ones, and also quicker as well, so lower noise and reduced time. So I think that the design aspect of it is something that can probably get looked at.
So I've got 4 more questions here, so I believe we should have time to go through them if that's okay. So the first one is, when noise levels from equipment is below 70 dB, but an operator mentions about the noise, can anything be done to further control the noise levels?
Of course, it's no different from higher noise levels. It's just that you're doing it for nuisance reasons rather than hearing damage reasons. There's zero risk at 70 dBA, even if you've got a 12-hour shift. But it can be annoyance. I remember measuring about 123 dB in a chemical works, and one of the operators waved to me and said, "Don't worry about that. There's a much worse noise source." And I was thinking, worse than 123 dBA, and it was 63 dBA in his control room, a hum from a fan. So it does have a big effect on people's sort of subjective response to the noise environment they're working in.
Do you have any advice on effective HPE that will protect people from peak levels of sound generated by gunshots?
I'll talk about that. Well, if you've got an issue with peak noise, then certainly you should be trying to buy hearing protection that's more specifically designed for that. The gunshot stuff, the obvious people to look at would be to see what the MOD are up to and what they're using. Some of them are using active control hearing protection, but certainly it's specifically tailored for it. However, what we have got with the MOD specifically is that they know that they can't always provide hearing protection, particularly for the high level stuff from artillery fire, and so they have a kind of an agreement that they'll try and protect as much as possible, but they have to renew that agreement with the HSE on a regular basis. But if you're just talking about general kind of shotgun use and that type of stuff, then yeah, it should be possible to get hearing protection which is rated for it. Obviously, you'd imagine NIOSH know a lot more about that, what with them being based in America. And if you actually look for noise data on gunfire, then if you go and have a look on the CDC website, they've got a huge database of a variety of things being shot in a variety of different locations. So good luck with that.
How can you reduce reverberance in food handling plants where tiling and steel are still used a lot to facilitate cleaning and hygiene?
What we usually recommend is you try and reduce the noise at source as much as practical. And then once you've done that, we try and use spot acoustic absorbent as close as possible to the source, and you use very high specification, high hygiene acoustic absorbent that can be steam cleaned and in situ. And also we've been pushing for a new version of some of them, which is magnetically attached, so you can just clip it on and unclip it from a surface, inside guards and so on. It is possible, but we try to use as little as possible, because even the high hygiene acoustic absorbent, it is quite expensive. If you're going to have a big area, you don't want to cover an entire ceiling, because you could carpet the place with a good underlay for less cost. So the general best approach is to try and reduce it at source as much as possible, and then introduce spot absorbent where it's going to do most good. But make sure the absorbent is sufficiently hygienic for a particular application.
Do the panel feel that a noise or hearing conservation program similar to the BOHS Breathe Freely campaign would have a successful impact? Would it be a game changer at all?
Don't know if I should answer that. I think the point that you're probably getting the sense that the discussions that I've had and what I've said and what Peter's saying is that we want people to concentrate their activities on control, which is higher up the control hierarchy, and try to, where possible, move away from hearing protection. But you'll notice the first slide I started off with was, bad hearing protection. So yeah, we are aware that the biggest issue we've got with hearing protection is that people just don't wear it when they're supposed to be, and if they are wearing it, they're not wearing it correctly. So I think if we did something on hearing protection, it would be around fitting it correctly and having the correct specification and making sure that it's getting worn. But if I had my choice and said, look, let's do a like a brief relay type campaign on noise, I would personally prefer to try and make the focus on control, which is higher up the control hierarchy, because I think, as Peter's kind of pointed out, you'll get a lot more benefit out of that, and it's a lot easier to control.
It's for me, it's all these years of experience of this. It's a lack of knowledge. It's an assumption that PP works well, whatever the noise level. And with £400 million a year claims, that's obviously worked extremely well. As far as noise control is concerned, there's lots of simple things that you can do to knock the level from 100 down to 95, or from 87 down to 83, or whatever, very, very cheaply. It's just people don't know what's possible or what's available. And I think it's sort of the educational thing as to saying, look, don't make assumptions about hearing protection and noise control. That would be a very useful campaign.
And then I think this is the last one now. What are your thoughts on personal dosimetry as part of a noise survey, and specifically interferences such as shouting or knocking the dosimeter?
I'm quite keen on this because we see so many reports where they massively overestimate exposure by doing both dosimeter reports, and part of that is just the peaks are almost always suspect. You get a lot of 135 plus peaks on dosimetry due to people knocking, shouting into them, jumping down off things. If it's very rare to get those sort of noise levels, and they need to be confirmed with the sound level meter. Or if you've got loads of dosimeters, put one on each shoulder, and if they both show a peak, it's real. If they don't, one of them does, it's not real. In general, we reckon that dosimetry overestimates often by between 1 and 6 dB is fairly common. So you're overestimating the risk in a lot of cases. Plus, dosimetry, the British Coal Board did a big study many, many moons ago, and in the end, they decided their policy was not to even bother turning them on for the first day, because the first day's results were different from all subsequent days' dosimetry. So if you think about the typical way they're used, someone goes into a factory, issues a load of dosimeters and collects at the end of the day, and that's part of the big part of the risk assessment. That data is somewhat dodgy, potentially, in a lot of cases.
I think it's how you're using them. I think that's the point Peter's making there, is that, I mean, I'm a bit more circumspect about them. I think if you're using them correctly and the person who's operating them understands what they're doing and what they're collecting and can pick out these issues, then there isn't a huge issue. But I think, if you're relying on one single dose badge to try and get an indication of what the exposures are, you're probably going to struggle. I think the thing to keep in the back of your head as well, though, regardless of whether you're using dosimetry or a sound level meter, is that HSE is not looking for sort of pinpoint accuracy here down to sort of half of a decibel. We're looking for an indication of whether or not you're above the action values or the limit values, and we want to see action on that. And it's an issue that kind of gets levelled a lot when we're looking at halves and hand-arm vibration control, that people spend a lot of time and money on their measurement activities and not a lot of time and money on their control activities. And one of the examples I always use is, it was a small woodworking shop that I went into, and the fellow who ran it, he employed about 2 or 3 people, so he didn't technically have to have a written risk assessment, and he didn't have any noise measurements, but he had a rough idea that the machinery that he had was over sort of 90 dB, because he got some noise ratings on it. He had an estimation of how long they were on for, and he said, well, I've introduced hearing protection based on what I think the noise levels are. I've introduced health surveillance for my staff to make sure that they aren't getting ill. And I've got an A4 sheet of paper with a list of control measures. So, you know, I'm going to get some new, I'm going to get this tool overhauled. I'm going to get that machine replaced in 2 years' time. And I've bought quieter cutting tools. And, you know, in that instance there, you think it's very difficult to say, well, what's he doing wrong? There's nothing really that he's doing wrong, even though he hasn't actually got any noise data, because he understands he's got a risk and he's acted upon the risk. And he has a reasonable understanding of whether he's above the action value and the limit value.
We do have one final question, if that's okay, and then I think we will call it there. Anything that comes out afterwards, we'll I'll send over to you separately after the webinar is over. So the final one is, what would be the best approach to reduce noise levels of 99 dBA coming from a Seltzer pump?
Is that sort of pump, that's the compressed air driven pump, if I remember rightly? If that's the case, you just need a very good pneumatic silencer on the outlet that doesn't have any back pressure.
I mean, if it's just for home use, if you thought about just getting a bottle of soda water, if you're drinking that amount of seltzer, I'm guessing it's not for home use.
I think Seltzer's a manufacturer.
Yeah.
Well, that is, yep, that seems to be the last of them. No more new questions coming in, so thank you everyone for submitting those. And I think that's everything. If there's anything else from Claire, Chris or Peter, I assume that's everyone's good to go. Yep, so thank you for attending today's webinar. Like I say, we'll be sending an email out with the recording, some supplementary reading materials, and answers to any questions that come in after the webinar is over. So hopefully we see you in the next set of webinars that we do around noise control. So that's all from me, and I will hopefully speak to you all very soon. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you.